Now, from the studios on the campus of the University of Common Sense, the only show dedicated to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. America, class is now in session. Right here, right now. Let's welcome this week's host.
Hey, Jim Brown here on the Common Sense Show. Glad you're joining us on a pretty cold day all over the country. We're here to have a good time with you, bring you up to the week's news. Ronna Gray, my co-host, is with me here, along with Leo Honeycutt, also a co-host, who's with us every week to talk about so many different events. Hope you guys are ready to get lively here today. Right, Ronna? Right, Leo?
Yeah. Lots to talk about. Women are marching. The government shut down.
Welcome back to Jim Brown's Common Sense. Now, here's your host and professor of Thinkology, Jim Brown.
With all the gridlock in Washington, with the Democrats and the Republicans both at each other's throat, isn't there some alternative that make them work together or give voters some choices? There's been some talk in the past about a third party. There's an organization called None of the Above. It's a nonpartisan organization based in Colorado that identifies and provides solutions for dysfunctional and polarization in the American political system. Boy, do we have that today. We got on the line with us right now Professor Nemerovski, who is Steven Nemerovski, who is a professor out at UCLA. He's been a lobbyist, college professor, and written extensively about third parties, and want us to get his take on this. Hey there, Professor. Good to talk to you today.
Good morning, Jim. How are you?
Fine. And give me a little thought about, there's been some talk about this third-party movement for some time. You've been very involved in it, based out of Colorado. But it seems like we put these roadblocks up to where the two political parties control the agenda, and we seem to be, our third-party efforts seem to be at the presidential level. You take a different slack, though. You think it should be done from the ground up. Isn't that correct?
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest problems is that you don't start at the top and go for president of the United States right off the bat. Among other things, even if you won, you can't be effective because you don't have an organization around you. You've got to start at a much lower level and build up, as you said.
But how do you do that? Now, we've got independents. We've got several independents in the U.S. Senate, in Congress, and I assume there's a number of independents and legislators across the country. Do they just make that call on their own? Do they get any support? How do you become an effective candidate as an independent?
Well, the theory is a rather simple one. I know you were in the legislature. Let's say you have a legislative body that's got 100 members, and it's split 52-48, 54-46, whatever it is. What that basically says is you have a third party that would capture 2, 3, or 4 seats. You get to the point where neither other party has a majority anymore. And when neither of the other parties has a majority, that puts the third party in play, and that allows them to rebalance the system. It's not a complicated theory, and I think you can accomplish that much better at state or local level, where you can manage the election cycles much better, you can target the resources much better, and probably get that result. If you need it, right now in the United States Senate, you could get to the same result if you had 3 independent seats, and then neither party would have a majority in the U.S. Senate. But those Senate races could cost, $50 to $100 million. The way they get fought right now is very difficult. And then I just don't think they could govern effectively. But if you applied the same theory at the local level, the state level, then I think you could accomplish something. Similarly, winning at this level, and I'm talking about, the next step is you actually have to govern effectively. So you have to produce results. It's one thing to win the election, but then you have to produce results. I still think that would be too hard at the U.S. Senate, given the filibusters and everything else they have to deal with. So for all those reasons, I think you start local and then you produce results.
Well, of course, you got to get good candidates. Just because you're third party doesn't mean you're going to broker a reasonable deal, I suppose. Tell us about your organization. Does None of the Above take an active role in trying to recruit candidates around the country?
No, None of the Above is actually more of an educational approach. We're trying to create a roadmap that others can learn from. So none of the above does two things. We try and educate people on what's being done around the country to break the cycle of dysfunction. Because there's a lot of groups that are out there, whether they're trying to attack campaign finance reform, whether they're trying to change redistricting, and I know redistricting is something you've written about, and we give them a voice, and we tell people, if you want to get involved in how you change the system, how you break the cycle of dysfunction, here's where you go to join some great organizations and try and make a difference. So that's one level of education we do. And then I've actually written some books that they're written as novels, but they're educational books to provide a roadmap to people that's saying, if you want to do this third-party thing, here's a roadmap for how you would get there.
And you can read all the information about the professor at noneoftheabove.us. Is that the best site to go to, Steve?
Noneoftheabove.us is the website, and then the books could be found at thirdparty.today. Thirdparty.today. Thanks for the commercial. Appreciate it.
All right. No, good.
Steve, Leo Honeycutt, we always wind up in the same circle. We're going back, and you have to bring up follow the money. And I know people on both sides support both candidates to make sure that they back the winner. But it is interesting when you go back to the elections in the 19th century, such as the 1860 election that we saw Abraham Lincoln elected in, you had 5 candidates on the ballot. 5. And somehow down through the years, we've just consolidated it all the way down to 2, so it becomes a fight between the Democrat and the Republican. Is there any way to change that back to where we have a better choice?
Well, one of the things I write about and talk about is what I call the incumbency protection effort, and you alluded to that earlier, that the people who have been sitting in office for a while have put themselves in a place where they're the only ones that can win. So you've got the campaign finance, and they've set up the campaign finance rules, right? Then you have redistricting, and again, you've written about it. Who does the redistricting? The sitting legislatures. So the people, as you've said, the people are choosing who they're going to represent, not the other way around. Then you have what you just talked about, the ballot access requirements. They make it incredibly difficult for anybody other than the 2 formal parties to get on the ballot. And then finally, there's a lot of voting restrictions that come into place where they've tried to rig the system so that their voters can get to the polls and not necessarily others. So when you combine all 4 of those elements, it's incredibly difficult. So the part of the third party notion is this: how do you break that cycle of incumbency, and how do you get to the table to make the legislative changes you need if you're not electing people? Because the current people aren't changing that system. They like that system. They keep getting reelected. Right. Even in the most turbulent of times, sitting incumbents are getting reelected at the 90 to 95% level.
Steve, this is Ronna Gray. I wanted to ask a question from a perspective of the anniversary of the Women's March, and there's such a push for more women to run for office at the local level. And a lot of the themes that you're talking about in None of the Above are being echoed there, I think, about this is where you address the gerrymandering. This is where you make campaign finance fair. Do you see any correlation with this, with the None of the Above movement? Do you see more women maybe running as independents or third parties, or are they falling into the two-party system?
Right now, I think they're falling into the two-party system because, quite frankly, that's the easiest thing to do. But if you look at the Tea Party movement, there were a bunch of women that stepped up at that time to run. But the Tea Party, for whatever reason, decided they wanted to live within the confines of the Republican Party. The same thing's happening now in the Democratic Party, where they have the progressive movement, and that's really where the action's been. You know, Bernie Sanders ignited a lot of people to get involved in the political process to try and make change, but they're staying within the confines of the party. I've written to suggest that if the progressives are serious, they should not make the mistake the Tea Party made, and they should look to set up their own party. Just so you know here, I have my own political views, but when I write about this stuff, it's non-ideological. It's just a theory about how we need one or two more parties to rebalance the system. So I'm not bringing an ideology here. I think anybody that wants to step up and create a third party will help rebalance the system. So right now, I think the action would be on the progressive side. I'm also with you on the thing about women. I've written about it. I've had people on my television show. I think another important part of rebalancing the system is to have more women reelected. If nothing else, we don't have any civility in government right now. I think you would change the tone, and that alone might go along.
Good point.
Well, Steve, good point. We're glad to have you on the show. His website is noneoftheabove.us. Professor Steve Nemerovski out at UCLA. Glad to have you on the show. Good luck, Steve. We look forward to having you back again in the future. You got a big mountain to climb, but we wish you every success, and thanks for being on our show with us today.
Thanks, Jim. Always happy to join you.
All right, take care. We'll freshen up our coffee, come right back to make some more common sense.
Listening to Jim Brown's Common Sense, right here on the Genesis Communications Radio Network at GCNlive.com.